All right, so good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Today we are talking about how to convert between fractions, decimals, and percentages. But before we start filling in all these blanks about each part, how to go from fraction to decimal, decimal to fraction, decimal to percent, and so on, I want to talk about why we can go between fraction, decimal, and percent to fraction to percent and decimal to percent and back and forth. Because all three of these formats are parts of a whole. So fractions, decimals, and percents are all parts of a whole. So when we talk about fractions, we know that fractions are part of a whole. So if I have 1/5 of a pizza, then I've had 1 out of 5 slices of that pizza. So part 1 slice out of the whole pizza. Decimals, we can think of decimals as parts of wholes as well. The best example that I know of a decimal part of a whole is money, right? 50 cents is part of a dollar, 25 cents is part of a dollar, and we write those as decimals. Percentages are also part of wholes, and the whole in a percentage is always 100. So it's part of 100. So our grades are always 90%, 90 out of 100 points. So I'm going to give an example of something that you guys are all very familiar with, the fraction 1/2. Okay? So the fraction 1/2, the decimal 5/10, and the percentage 50% are all what we call equivalent or equal to one another. Okay? So if I get a 1 out of 2 on a quiz, that's the same thing as getting 5/10 on a quiz, which is the same thing as getting a 50% on a quiz. So all of these are equal. A half of a dollar is the same as 50 cents, because we could put a placeholder 0 here to make it 50 cents, which is the same as 50% of a dollar. All of these things are equal. So that's what we're going to be practicing today, how to go from one of these forms to the other. Okay, and we know fractions look like two numbers over one another with a fraction bar in the middle. Decimals obviously look like this. We have a number out front, maybe a decimal point, and then numbers behind. And then percentages, we always use this percent sign. Okay. All right, so let's start with the first section, which is turning a fraction into a decimal. We've been talking about this quite a bit lately. The operation, okay, that is denoted by a fraction is division. So anytime we see a fraction, we know that we're going to use division. All right? The only important thing, or the most important thing to remember about turning a fraction into a decimal is that when you're doing your division problem, it does not matter which number is greater. You always use the top number first. So top number is always first. Top number is always, always, always first. Now, I say first because we're actually going to be plugging these into our calculators today. When you learned this in elementary school, you probably heard something like top dog gets the house or something like that. So the top number goes inside the house. But we're not actually going to set up long division problems today. I want you guys to use your calculators, okay? So I want you to type in the top number first, always. All right? So all I'm going to do when turning a fraction into a decimal is I'm going to grab my calculator. And let's look at the first example here, 1/4. To turn 1/4 into a decimal, all I'm going to do is take the first number, or the top number, take 1 divided by 4. Okay, and you can see my answer is 0.25. Okay, so top number first, bottom number second. Top number is known as your numerator, bottom is your denominator. So I'm going to take 3 divided by 7. 3 divided by 7. Okay, now this is a long decimal. I'm going to write out some of the digits. 0.42857149. That's what my calculator says right now. Okay, so we can write that entire answer, or we can round it. If there are directions to round it, then round it appropriately. So in this case, they've rounded to the hundredths place. Okay, so the 2 would round up to a 3 because that 8 is going to bump it up. So 0, 4, 3. Okay. Now there's one other type I want to talk about in this section, and that is a repeating decimal. So sometimes you're going to type into your calculator, let's do 1/3. So 1 divided by 3, and you'll see that your answer is 0.333333333. Okay, so to denote a repeating decimal, if it continues to say 3 or follow a pattern, so 3, 5, 3, 5, 3, 5, then you're going to write it like this. So 0.3, that's the only number I see over and over again. I'm going to put a line above it. That way I don't have to write out several 3s. So what you're going to do at this point, in between each video, you're going to have a few practice problems. There are 8 per section. So once you finish filling this in and you feel like you can turn a fraction into a decimal successfully, you're going to grab your worksheet, and you notice part 1 is fraction to decimal, which is what we just practiced here, fraction to decimal, and you're going to simply do these 8 problems. Once you finish these 8 problems, you're going to come back to this, and you're going to open up your Mac, and you're going to work on this next section.